This is for Cameron. Cam.
What is up, Mountaineer fans? We have an exciting show for you this evening. I have an exciting guest for you this evening. We're going to talk some West Virginia Baylor football. This Thursday, we're going to play under the lights at Mountaineer Field. I've got a guest for you, Craig Smoak from Sicem 365 Sports. How we doing, Craig?
Doing well, Paul. Appreciate you having me on. And yeah, it's good to have game week after, both teams got a little bit of a break. So should be interesting coming up on Thursday. And like I said, I appreciate you having me.
Hey, no problem. I appreciate you being on. So I got to tell you, neither team looks good coming into this loss to Oklahoma State. You guys are probably one of the best two-loss teams in the country. I don't think there's many people that would disagree with that. West Virginia, one of the most inconsistent teams in the country. And yet, when you boil it all down to something, Baylor's never won in Morgantown. Can you make any sense of this?
Yeah, I think, the Morgantown thing has been, somewhat a product of just the fact they haven't played there a ton. That this is still, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, relatively new, even though now it's kind of been a while. But you know what I mean? There's not like that 100 years of
Right.
results and whatnot. I think that's part of it. I think, too, just when they've, gone up there, either, West Virginia's had a good team or they've been pretty evenly matched, or maybe Baylor hasn't, been the favorite. But they, there's been a couple times where, yeah, you thought they might go up there and get themselves a win. So it's sort of surprising that this is one of the last boxes they haven't been able to check off. And, if they don't check it off this week, I know West Virginia fans feel the same way about, how important it is, to get a win for them this week. But I think it's equally important for Baylor. I don't think that they can really afford to have this streak continue. So I'm very curious, to see how all this breaks down ultimately. But, yeah, I just think that, like I said, there's been even matchups, times where WVU's better, and then the times when Baylor's been better. I think just the crowd's gotten to them. I think the atmosphere and the travel's gotten to them, and that's all credit to West Virginia and their fans and that atmosphere. So I know I've had a couple West Virginia fans telling me that, they don't think it's going to be that same type of atmosphere because, it's not as, I guess, amongst the fan base as positive right now as maybe it's been in other years past. But I still expect there to be a great atmosphere and a great crowd. And, I think West Virginia fans are smart enough to realize that Baylor's definitely beatable. So I anticipate them, having an impact on Thursday night. So Baylor's going to have to overcome that. But, yeah, I think it's just a combination of things. And, a lot of that's credit to the Mountaineers.
Yeah, it's looking to be a deficiency on deficiency, strength on strength matchup. The lines of scrimmage on both sides are strengths for either team. The Baylor defensive line, one of the best in all of college football. West Virginia, a much improved offensive line, even though Texas absolutely wore us out last or the week before last. But I think you guys are a different type of defensive line than Texas is. Not quite the huge front that they are. You guys are more of an athletic front. You've got a couple big dudes there, but you lost some really good players as well. But what I'm really interested in is to see you've got obviously two great weapons in Sims and Baldwin out there with shaping throwing those guys the ball. And I'm curious to see how in the last 2 weeks our defensive backfield has hopefully recovered, hopefully gotten a little bit more experience. They scrimmaged 3 times over the last 2 weeks, hard-hitting football. We've got a guy that's been injured that came in as a JUCO that's supposed to be playing his first game with us. How do you see that matchup playing out?
As far as Baylor wide receivers and tight ends go, I think that's a big question mark for the Bears. Quite frankly, Paul, there's a lot of question marks for this team, and probably more than even if you were being a pessimist, you really expected there to be at this point. But going into this season, one of the things that you were curious about was the skill spots because, you lost Tyquan Thornton, who ended up being the top 50 overall pick to the Patriots. You lost, some other, great weapons as far as the running backs go with Abram Smith, and then Treston Ebner was a guy who could be a running back, but also was a great passing threat for you as well. There was others. R.J. Sneed transferred out to Colorado, even though he didn't have as much of an impact last year as I thought he might. Drew Estrada ended up going off to the NFL, and he's on the Texans practice squad now. So, they had a lot to replace. And I remember during the offseason, a lot of people talking about, well, they got young guys, but they got talent. They'll be fine. They got talent. And I was more of like, yeah, they got talent, but like it's totally unproven. There's no, Tyquan Thornton wasn't great as a freshman. He was pretty good. He was fine, but he was way better as a senior. So yeah, they got talent, but they've got freshman talent. They've got sophomore talent. They've got unproven talent. And I think that's reared its head. Ben Sims has been good. He's also been banged up. So he hasn't been 100% healthy, throughout the whole season just yet. But I do expect him to play and be good and all that. And I think he'll be a threat. I think that, outside of that, it's your guess is as good as mine as far as who's going to step up to the plate and actually make a difference for them, because they don't have a Treston Ebner coming out of the backfield. They got a couple guys at running back who can catch the ball on occasion, but nothing like what they had with him. And the receiver room, quite frankly, is just totally unproven. It's a work in progress. And I think that if you were to say, like, who could have the advantage here potentially, I'd have to give it to West Virginia, just because even if they have questions, I don't feel like they have as many questions on defense or in their secondary as Baylor has, just in terms of, okay, we're 6 games in now and we still don't have a number one at wide receiver. Ben Sims is your number one, but he's your tight end, and that's fine. Like we see with Georgia or, Kyle Pitts in Florida, or Iowa State with Kohler and whoever. Like, I mean, we've seen teams that can live with the number one at tight end, and they've been able to kind of do that. But, man, it's more just they don't have a lot around that, It's just a lot of just unproven. And, yes, there is some talent, but it's unproven talent again. So I kind of keep hammering that, but I'm hammering that because that's been a conversation after every single game this year. It's like, okay, right, who's going to step up? Who's going to step up? Who's going to step up? Who's going to step up in Morgantown? Ben Sims seems like a safe bet, but Paul, outside of that, it's anybody's guess. I mean, especially as far as the wide receivers go. So I think that that's an area that West Virginia could certainly feel pretty good about is what their secondary and just defense overall might be able to do to any Baylor receiving threats. But yeah, if you're going to keep an eye on a guy, keep an eye on Ben Sims, and maybe Drake Dabney, their backup tight end, to a lesser extent. He can catch a couple of balls and be kind of dangerous. But man, they honestly they just don't have a lot that's make you go, uh-oh, like, what are we going to do about this guy? They don't have that right now.
Well, I'll tell you a couple guys I do have that feeling with. Galvin Miller, Keith Gall. Those are guys that I feel like are really proven. You guys have one of the best offensive lines in the conference. But it's strength on strength. We have one of the better defensive lines in the conference. So how do you feel like McWilliams and Jones have played behind those guys this year? Have they shown some flashes?
Yeah, it's mostly been Squirrel Williams has really been kind of the highlight guy for them, but he doesn't play a whole lot. He didn't have a bunch of carries in their last game. I say as far as kind of their running back room, McWilliams, he's out of action for the time being. He got dinged up and has a concussion that's been ailing him. So you don't have to worry about Tay McWilliams. Quaylon Jones is more of a third running back type, I think, based on where they are right now. The guys to really worry about would be, number one would be Richard Reese. And I think he's a guy that a lot of people are going to be learning about as the rest of this season goes along. I think if you've played Baylor already, you're probably aware of him. But he's just a true freshman who really – when Tay McWilliams got hurt, he was kind of called into further action. But, he's still a true freshman, and he's not a big guy either. He's kind of a smaller body in comparison to most college running backs these days. So you're going to see Richard Reese. You'll probably see 15 to 20 carries from him. You'll see Craig Williams, a.k.a. Squirrel, who is their dynamic guy, but he's very tiny. He's very injury prone, and so that's why they've had to basically – handle him with kid gloves, because there's such a risk for, it's like on the one hand, he's so good when he's healthy. And on the other hand, he's just so injury prone that they have to walk a really delicate balance with him. So, I think you'll see mostly Reese. You'll see a little bit of sprinkling of Squirrel. And to what extent, I'm very curious, because he got very little play when we saw them 2 weeks ago against Oklahoma State, which was surprising because they really could have used him to do a lot more than just a couple of carries that he had. And then you mentioned Jones, and Quaylon Jones is a guy who will probably get a handful of carries as well in this game, I would think. I mean, I think that they've been okay. I think that their ceiling is much higher than what we've seen so far, but injuries and just the situational aspect of, the games they've been in and whatnot have kind of limited this from being the sort of, bell cow type of back group that they would love to have. Their bell cow, the guy they thought would be their bell cow, McWilliams, haven't seen much of him. I mean, I don't know how bad his concussion must be because he's been dealing with it for a while. So they don't really have a bruiser, Paul. They've got some speedsters. I guess Quaylon Jones actually would probably be the closest to a bruiser, but again, he doesn't get a lot of carries. So I think you'll see a lot of Richard Reese, and I think he'll be able to do relatively well. But I am concerned that if, their receiver targets aren't getting any separation or aren't able to make some tough catches, that West Virginia defense could really key in on the run game. And you mentioned that line, and they've been very good over the last year and a half. I think they played well. I think Baylor fans are maybe a little bit spoiled and expected them to be just like completely dominant. And, for Blake Shapen to never feel pressure or anything like that. It's been a little bit more of a work in progress, but Khalil Keith started practicing again this week. He's been a missing piece for them, and so I'm not sure if that means he'll play or not. But if he does, I think that is good news for Baylor. But I like West Virginia's chances, man, just in overall against this offense, because right now the O-line's been pretty good, the running backs have been okay, the receivers have been and that's sort of where this offense is. Whereas I think last year going in, you would have said the offensive line's been great. The running backs, Abram Smith in particular, and Ebner, great. Receivers, pretty good, right? And all of that's changed from last year. So I think West Virginia's really, got not a favorable matchup, but they've got a pretty even matchup in my eyes when you look at line to skill spots on the Baylor offense.
That leads into my next question about Gary Bohanon. Obviously, he's at USF doing his own thing, up and down there. Obviously, not the same amount of talent surrounding him. Do you think losing the aspect of the quarterback run has hurt the running game?
Yeah, there's been a lot of chatter about Gary whenever they've obviously struggled. You know how that goes.
Of course.
I still think Blake was the right call, just from an arm standpoint. But
yeah.
To your point about Gary's being able to run a little bit, I do think that's hindered them a little. Blake can scoot. He can get out there and pick up a first down on occasion, but he's not going to break off like the long, and Gary was a kind of a bruiser too. Like he could have a guy bounce off of him trying to tackle him. So I do think that's affected them a little bit. I think that's kind of the work in progress, that they're having to do things differently than maybe they did last year. Like I said, with the offensive line, like they're not as dominant as they were. They're not as good at running back. They're not as good at wide receiver. So I think all of those things have had an equal effect. But if you had Gary out there, at least in maybe some of those instances where, you need to still be able to run the football, but defenses are keyed in on Squirrel or Reese, maybe he can give you a little something there that opens things up a little bit. If the receivers aren't able to get open, like Gary can just give you a different look that Blake doesn't really have the ability to give you like Gary could. So I do think that's had an effect and has changed things a little bit. But ultimately, like I said, I think that's a byproduct of everything kind of not being as good as it was last year, But I hate that he's had such a rough road in Tampa so far, just as far as that team not being very good. Quality young men. And I'll tell you what, Paul, I think that, this Baylor team, like I think they're figuring out who they are. But the problem with it is that the way Dave Aranda's talked about it, there's almost like a separation between the vets and the young guys, not in terms of like liking each other or anything like that, and not even as much in terms of chemistry really, as much as just the mindsets and focuses are a little bit different. And it sounds like they're trying to kind of bring the young guys along, and those vets are obviously in a different place, and that's just not really meshing as seamlessly as they thought it would. And that's why during the offseason, a lot of people were like, well, man, they're losing Jalen Petrie, and they're losing Terrell Bernard, they're losing, JT Woods, they're losing all these guys. And those guys were important from a playing standpoint, but I think they were equally important from a leadership standpoint. And quite frankly, it's still, even knowing that was coming, that there was going to be a leadership void, it's still surprising there's been as much of one as there still seems to be 6 games into a season. He's still talking, Aranda, about the same things that he was talking about in March. as far as leadership and like young guys and things like that. And that's really concerning. I mean, that's really concerning. And my point with having said all that is that's where I think they miss Gary the most. I think that Gary's missed the most in the locker room and in the training room and in the weight room, because that was a guy that the moment he stepped on campus, recruited by Matt Rule, he was not somebody that everybody wanted at quarterback. I think Arkansas wanted him at like a linebacker, right? And maybe some others wanted – really, though, like he's just a big dude. And I think Arkansas wanted him on defense. Yeah, and probably how he would make the pros, honestly, but he wanted to play quarterback, and Baylor wanted him at quarterback, and so he took them up on that. But, yeah, I think to answer your question, that's where he's missed the most. Certainly in the run game to an extent, but I think, the bigger difference would be made in just the belief that the team has in him or had in him, and the examples that he set. Always the first guy. I know it's all the cliche stuff, but always the first guy at the facility, always the first guy watching film when the coaches show up at 6 a.m. He's already been there for like an hour and a half, all the lights are off and like, oh, man, there's Gary when you flip the lights on. I mean, he was that type of guy. So I think that Blake Shapen's tried to do what he could to, fill that. Other guys have tried to fill that. But, yeah, they miss Gary from a leadership standpoint and to a lesser extent from a running standpoint.
Interesting. I would never make the argument that Gary Bohanon is a better player. I just think the personnel you guys have this year fit what he can do for you better. But that doesn't mean Blake's not a better player. It's just you guys need to either find some unproven guys that step up or recruit or transfer portal or however you do it. Get some better weapons around Shapen, because he's very obviously got an NFL arm. I don't think anybody would doubt that. But you can't. It's just like JT. He's obviously got an NFL arm too, and our receivers have struggled to get separation this year. So I think a lot of people look at his numbers and say he's averaging right around 200 yards a game. He doesn't even have double-digit touchdowns. And with our receiving core, I think that would shock some people, because of the names that are in that room. But, man, really, when you think about it, Bryce Ford Wheaton's been at West Virginia for 5 years now. When did you find out about him? Most people would say this year.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely heard about him before this year, knew about him before this year.
Of course,
I think for most people, I think they're like, man, who's this Bryce Ford Wheaton?
Yeah,
and you're right.
That wild?
It is weird, and I think that for Baylor, losing Snead to the transfer portal, losing Tyquan Thornton to the NFL, losing Estrada to the NFL, and I'm trying to think if there's anybody else I'm missing. I might be missing like one name or so, but and then the running backs were also receiving threats, like I mentioned earlier. So that's a pretty big chunk of guys to lose. Yeah, and then and quite frankly, this is what I said about Shapen all offseason. I never moved or wavered off of him being the guy. Like I always figured he was going to be the guy after what we saw, those last couple games of the year. And then Gary came in the Sugar Bowl, and he just was not very good. And that just kind of felt like
a bad performance.
Yeah. And thankfully they were able to get around that and still win that game. But I think like that's when it kind of dawned on everybody of like, okay, this is probably going to be Blake's team, and they still let him compete and all that. And it was Blake's team ultimately, but yeah, it's a lot to replace. And getting back to the point about Blake, when everybody was going crazy over him after the Oklahoma State game and all that, I had to say over and over again of like, I get that everybody believes in Blake, and I believe in Blake, and I believe he's the guy, but we're still all saying this after 2.5 games. Like you think about it, he played 2.5 games last year. He came in the Kansas State game, which I'm not counting like mop up duty, like a series at the end of a blowout. As far as actual real deal playing time, he came in at the end of that Kansas State game last year and finished that bad boy off after Gary got hurt. Then played in the Texas Tech game at home, which was a missed field goal from going to overtime, and they beat Tech. Yeah, and then they get into the championship game, and obviously he was like dazzling in the first half, and then he gets hurt, and then they had to basically just he was able to manage, but then he didn't play in the bowl game, so he played 2.5 games basically as the start two as the starter, 2.5 as like a main contributor. So that also plays into it. So lack of so the offensive line not quite as good as it's been, or maybe as is expected, to be dominance wise. Skill guys totally unproven outside of maybe one guy, and then a quarterback who's still very much a young player and trying to find his way, even though the whole country was watching him tear up Oklahoma State for 2 quarters. That's all most of those people realize about it. Like, oh man, who's this Baylor kid? Whereas obviously I'm going like, it looks really good, but this is a very small sample size. So
Yeah.
I think Blake's
trying to pump the brakes
really,
just a little bit.
Yeah. So I just think that's a lot of change, man. That's a lot of turnover. And that, I think everybody tried to be optimistic and thought, okay, well, if everything falls into place, they'll be fine. Well, everything hasn't fallen into place. It's taken a bit more of a growing pain here and there. And I don't think Blake's a guy who's really struggled. I wouldn't classify it as that, but he's had some growing pains along the way as well. So it's been interesting to track.
Obviously, I'm a big fan of your show, so I've been watching you guys for over a year now. Very loyal as far as I either watch you live or I watch the clips later. You guys do a wonderful job marketing that show. So, I know quite a lot about how you guys feel about things. It's kind of weird, I'm sure, for you, like people know these things about you now. But I know that you've been a Neil Brown guy. You up until here recently, you were very fond of him, possibly being the Baylor coach at one point in time. So are you falling off of that? How do you feel about it? Paul thinks we should give him more time. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I love the hire when they made it. I like the Neil Brown hire, and I've been maintained that. I think as far as falling off of that, I think the only way you could say I've fallen off of that. No, I wouldn't even say I've fallen off. I guess the way that I've come closest to falling off of that is just early on when they came out of the gate struggling a little bit. I thought, oh no, like. Yeah, they're going to have to show some strides, like, in the next week or two, or otherwise this could get really ugly, even if they're playing quality competition. Like I know they gave the Pitt game away. Like, and so even in the losses, you could see like, well, they shouldn't have lost that game, or they were this close to not losing that game. And I understand some of the frustrations the fans have with like maybe how he goes about doing certain things, but I feel like they've been close. They're knocking on that door. Yeah, and so I feel like it's just a patience thing, and I understand that not everybody has patience these days, especially. Well, and he has been around a little while now, so I get it. But in terms of me being a believer in Neil Brown, I still believe he's a good coach. I still believe he can do really good things for West Virginia, and I do believe he's going to be around for the foreseeable future, no matter what happens on Thursday night. That's just my hunch. But yeah, I'm still a big fan of Neil Brown.
Appreciate that. He's hard not to like.
Yeah, I should also mention that Graham Harrell is married to one of my sister's best friends. And I don't know Graham. I don't know him, but it's just kind of a cool tie-in that my sister grew up with Graham's eventual wife. So I know her very well. She's a sweet, sweet girl. And
that's
he
awesome, dude.
He married well. Yeah, so I'm a big Graham Harrell fan for that reason as well.
That's awesome. That's a great story. Actually, Coos told me about that yesterday because I told him I was talking with you, and he had mentioned he didn't give me the whole story. He said, but he said that you knew you had a tie-in with him with Graham somehow. So
yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Like I said, I don't know him. I won't pretend to be his boy or anything like that. But there is a connection there, and my sister knows him, and I think she's going to probably try to get out to Morgantown to visit at some point and see a game. They did that when he was at USC last year or the year before. And yeah, so I'm like invested as far as wanting this staff to do really well. But yeah, prior to Graham's hire, I was a big Neil Brown believer, and I still am. And I just think it's, there's been reasons why it's just not maybe hit its stride as quickly as some people wanted to. So I'm interested to see how it keeps playing out.
Yeah, I think the criticism, and these are coming from former players as well, that he has a hard time firing his friends when he needs to. And I think a lot of coaches struggle with that. Sure. And there are a few guys on the staff that probably need to go. And he's actually gotten a lot better at it. It's not something that not everybody's Nick Saban, that has that cold, calculated mentality about things. People have hearts. People have families. It's difficult to send somebody home that has a family, even if they are well off. It's just hard to do. So, sure. But he's apparently he's making strides in that. He's made a few changes. Obviously, letting go of the offensive coordinator duties was a big deal. Bringing Graham in, I think the psychology of this game is, for me, from the Mountaineer side of things, you know, watching the press conferences today, a few of the players that played the game last year, we got manhandled by you guys. Now, obviously, they're aware, like you are, these are different players. Like you made very clear today, this is not the same Baylor team. But there are some of those same players. And the players on the West Virginia side of things sound like this has been bulletin board material for an entire year, because we didn't get embarrassed by anybody the way we got embarrassed by you guys last year. It was a manhandling. It really, truly was. And we didn't even belong on the same field as you guys. The lines of scrimmage was just it was actually gave our team a new motto for the offseason. The offensive lineman, every offensive lineman gained at least 10 pounds in the offseason because of the Baylor game. So it's really been something kind of cool to see. It gives me just a little bit of added hope that we'll play better in the trenches Thursday. I still think you guys are further ahead in that regimen, though. Whoever your all strength staff is, whoever that is, does an absolute banger of a job, because you guys are strong every year now.
Yeah, that was Dave Aranda making a phone call back to the LSU days as far as the training staff goes, and you know, it's interesting to hear that, because I think that that's something that Baylor has ran into now a couple of different times. Thinking of the BYU game, that was a game that was basically a bulletin board game for the Cougars, and if you watch that game, which I don't know how many, I mean, I guess a couple million people did, but that was a late game out in Provo, and that crowd was fired up, and Kalani Sitake had talked that game up, and he said as much. He said that Baylor physically manhandled them, and that they basically took that with them into the offseason, and that was like some of their motivation, was that they were not going to get, you know, bullied like they got bullied against Baylor. I think then Oklahoma State just last week, you know, all they heard all offseason was about the Big 12 championship game and not getting into the corner of the end zone and not being able to win that game. And so I don't know if Baylor realizes this, because of the fact that they are a unique mixture of young and old, and a lot of their old, you know, that was of the highest importance is now gone. But I don't know if they fully realize how much of a target's really on their back.
They're getting everybody's best shot.
Yeah, and I don't know that they realize that. And if they realize that, I don't think they're responding very well to that. So if you're looking for a feather potentially in West Virginia's cap, that could be one, because it was for Oklahoma State and it was for BYU as well. And I'm sure it will be for others. And given your example there with West Virginia, it's understandable of why it is for them as well. So
it was a butt whooping.
Yeah, I mean, they've still been plenty physical. There's, you know, Vic Valoria is the strength coach's name that Durant knew from LSU. You know, he's still got these guys, you know, looking good and being tough and all of that. But I just think there's a mentality that's kind of missing there. So they've got to be careful with that, especially, you know, knowing now that West Virginia's kind of had this motivation, this specific motivation with them now coming to town. You know, you would hope that they learned their lesson already, having this have happened a couple of times, but we will see on Thursday night. We will see. But yeah, Vic Valoria has done a really nice job, and hopefully they'll be ready to come out and play physical, because it definitely sounds like they'll need to.
I asked Paul the same question. I'm just curious, because, you know, 10 years isn't a long time in college football, you know, and that's how long we've been a member of the conference. You know, people ask us all the time why we're such impatient fans as West Virginia fans. As spoiled as Baylor fans have been since RG3 came along in 2010 and 11. That was around the time frame, right? 2010 and 11, RG3. Yeah. So you guys have obviously experienced. He was the catalyst for a lot of the success that you guys have experienced, and along with the good coaches and everything you've hired along the way. But RG3 really made you guys cool. And West Virginia, we had that for 1988 to 2010-ish. You know, we were very good. And I think our best is almost become ancient history to us. You know, 2012 was the last time we were ever in a New Year's Six type game. You know, so it's becoming history to a lot of us.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our fans are just done waiting. And, you know, we played a national championship game. We're the winningest team in history that's never won the national championship. You know, you probably hear it all the time, top 15 all-time in wins. We all know this. And so I think it's either we need to adjust our expectations that we'll never be back to that 9 and 10 win a year program like we used to be, or Neil Brown needs to do better. I think what you said is going to happen. I think he's going to do better. The recruiting class we have coming in this year is obviously top 25. It's top 3 in the conference as we speak now. Now that Texas Tech has fallen down a few pegs. So it's going to be interesting to see. But my question to you was, do people on your side of the country, not people like you that are heavily invested in football, but just a casual fan, do you think they know that West Virginia has like the kind of history that they really do? Like, a pretty luxurious history.
Honestly, probably not. I think, if you were to go to people like myself, then yeah, they're aware of that. Like they're aware that West Virginia's, been good for longer than just maybe when they, first burst onto the Big 12 scene and people, first started paying a little bit more attention, at least in this region, to them. But I mean, shoot, I think everybody who was paying attention to college football in the early 2000s knew very much about West Virginia and Pat White and Noah Devine and Stedman Bailey and so many countless others. But yeah, I think in terms of like where they are historically and how they stack up and what they've actually accomplished, I think that's probably lost on most people. Yeah, I think it's probably I think if you're talking to most people, they're probably like I just did, and they're bringing up stuff from like the last 20 or so years. But beyond that, I don't think that there's probably a great knowledge there. So, maybe that's – I guess you could market that, but then again, you kind of need to have right now success to kind of really also, look at the overall success. Because if you're not having success right now, but you're bragging about that, then it kind of – it's like, you got to kind of have it right now too to also embrace the past as much as you would like to. So I think, West Virginia can, string together some wins, sooner rather than later, and kind of then have the platform to show everybody all of the great players that have gone through that program and all of the incredible games and yes, the championship appearances or wins. Hopefully in this new version or iteration of the Big 12, West Virginia will have some of that steady success to be able to put that on more of a platform. But I do think that just because of the region that I'm in, where there's just so many teams and so many changes and so many leagues and all that West Virginia is kind of like that team that is there, but you just don't really know a ton about. You know what I mean? Yeah. Particularly, the stuff that's probably pre-2000-ish because, quite frankly, a lot of people in Texas weren't paying attention to West Virginia really close until they were on the schedule. And I'm sure that West Virginia fans didn't give a dadgum about Texas Tech and TCU and Baylor, Right. So I think it's probably like that, but I'm sure that they'll have plenty of opportunities to show some of that in the future.
It's interesting. It makes me wonder because a lot of fans think that in the new Big 12, West Virginia we feel we should be at the top of that, and I don't know if we need to adjust those expectations or if that's right on the money. It's hard to say. We're going to find out.
We'll find out. I mean, I think realistic expectations to compete for Big 12 championships is realistic. I think that's more than fair. I think thinking anything playoff wise is probably a little nuts right now. Because you need to take steps, but I don't think that there's any reason why West Virginia fans shouldn't feel, especially in the portal era, like in the next couple years, if Neil Brown's not competing for a title, then I'll jump on board and say, like, you know what, man, this isn't going where it needs to. Because, like, just show me that you're getting closer. That's what I want to see. Like, show me that, like, you're taking steps positively and then that you're inevitably going to be scratching on the surface a little bit and show that there's a pathway. And they're still very much in the, trying to create a pathway right now. So I guess to answer your question, I think it's fair to have Big 12 championship aspirations. I think, necessarily right now it shouldn't be do or die. But, in the next couple of years, as he's been there longer and longer, and in this era where you can flip teams pretty quickly if you just put the right amount of resources into it, that's fair to want more from West Virginia fans, certainly.
I appreciate that honest take, man. I really do. I live in Southern Ohio right now. I'm from West Virginia, born and raised. And that's Ohio State country. And I'm telling you, I hate Ohio State worse than any Pitt team I've ever watched. And it's because I can't even have a conversation with them, about us, because how could we ever stack up to them? You know what I'm talking about. as a
Oh
Baylor
yeah,
fan, you know?
there's a team in Austin that's like that. There's a team in College
Yeah.
Station that tries to be like that, and everybody just says, "Shut up, you're not what you think you are." And
Please
they go
don't
back
send
to
Jimbo our way.
no, no, no. I know, yeah, he's got those ties, but no, I don't think that's happening. I don't think A&M can afford that anytime soon. But yeah, I definitely know what that feeling's like, and that's part of the reason, like with Texas, and Oklahoma as well. I'm not. I like Oklahoma. I root for Oklahoma. This past weekend was really tough, but I've seen that arrogance over the years from both of those teams, and I've seen that arrogance online from Ohio State fan and from Michigan guy, and it's the same 10 or 15 pro. It's the blue bloods,
Yeah, right.
and that's just a part of the game, but. Just you got to let that roll off your back, and it's unfortunate because I do feel like some of the snobbiest would probably enjoy those conversations about what it's like to not be guaranteed 10 wins a year and to not always have it basically set up for you to go run the table, albeit
We're the real
having
ones.
this one game. Yeah, it's doing it the realest way. I mean, you don't have every gift known to man. You don't have every advantage and benefit known to man. And I know all those with the advantages and benefits are trying to go make their exclusive club now, which, we'll see how all that goes. But, yeah, it is a bit more real as far as how you get to that end goal. Teams like West Virginia, teams like Baylor, teams like most of the Big 12 have to do it a different way and a more difficult way. And that's why I think it's much more respected and appreciated when they go and they have a year like Baylor had last year, for example, versus Oklahoma going and having a year like that, which they do every couple of years, and which here pretty soon they're going to really be missing a great, great deal.
100% agree. Let's touch on the Baylor defense really quick, and then we'll get a score prediction. I know you're a super busy dude. You give me almost 40 minutes, man. I really
You're
appreciate
good, man.
this.
Yeah.
So obviously the strength of that unit's the defensive line. Can you highlight some players on all three levels for me that West Virginia fans need to know about?
Yeah, they've been playing pretty good defense. I think because of the results this year that, it's like the offense probably gets a bit more disrespect than it's deserving of. Like, everybody wants to point to the offense against Oklahoma State. And it's like, well, actually that was special teams. It's like, but both sides aren't really quite to where they were last year. So it's like, oh, well, they suck. Or they, the defense is still pretty stinking good. Like they don't give up the run very much, if at all. But I guess we'll put it this way. Their strength is up front. The offense or the defensive line in the middle at nose, you've got Apu Ika, who is an LSU transfer from a couple years back. He's the one that probably most people know. He's a stud,
Right.
Big dude in the middle, and he's a force. I mean, he's not a force in terms of busting into the backfield and eating up your quarterback, but in terms of just clogging the middle up and making running really hard, like that's his job as the nose, and that's what he does very well. So he's the one that I think every offensive coordinator and head coach mentions by name when they talk about the Baylor defense, like they did last year with Petrie and Bernard. So that's the dude in the middle. They've also got Jackson Player, the transfer came in from Tulsa, who's originally a Waco guy. He's been pretty good. Probably not as good as anticipation would have had you believe when he first committed from the transfer portal. But they're just super solid along the defensive line. Really, though, the main guys, Apu Ika, TJ Franklin at the end spot are kind of the two main forces there, and they're pretty deep. Like that's the unit you feel good about. The problem is they're just, as a defense combined, they're not getting a lot of pressure on the quarterback. And that's something that Petrie and Bernard and Woods and all those guys were just exceptional at. Was
so good.
They knew how to get to the quarterback. They knew how to get to the backfield. They knew how to get to where the ball was going and how to make plays. And they just are missing an element of that. So they'll make West Virginia really have to work hard to run the football. They will make life hard for JT Daniels in terms of just some pressure at times and just not being able to have the run to fall back on, most likely. But unless some things have changed during the bye week, I don't know how much he'll be running for his life, really. I mean, I know he's not Spencer Sanders, but they didn't really make Spencer Sanders have to sweat too much because they just weren't really in his grill all that often. So they're good stout against the run, led by Apu Ika, but not very good as far as creating pressure right now. Linebacker Dylan Doyle's the man in the middle. He was a mainstay, big-time player for them last year. He's sort of the captain of the defense. He's back and is that guy in the middle and that captain once again. Matt Jones is another one of their linebackers who can be pretty disruptive. But really, it's the Doyle show at linebacker, and then in the secondary, that's where the front seven was hurt by losing some playmakers, but the secondary was hurt by losing some playmakers and also losing a ton of experience. I mean, they had fifth and sixth year guys in that group last year, and you lose Kalen Barnes to the draft, and you lose Raleigh Tejada to the draft. Those were two guys who started a lot of games for you at cornerback. And then you also lost JT Woods at the safety spot, who obviously ended up being a third-round pick for the Chargers and was a big-time ball hawk for you. So the secondary has been, if there's a weakness, it's been that. And I don't know that there's really a quick fix right there, because it's not like you can just go jump on the portal and grab more guys. Like, they have who they have, and they've got some talented players, but they're very young. And so I think you're seeing some of those growing pains and that lack of experience really rearing its head primarily in the secondary. So solid in the front seven, but not quite as good as they were last year in either one of those areas. And then definitely worse in the secondary than they were a year ago, for various reasons, like youth, like inexperience, and like the fact that they just lost good players in general. So that's kind of how the defense is. Like, they're still good. They'll still, don't think you can just go on fourth and whatever every single time against them. They will stuff you. They will stop your run game, but they will also allow big explosive plays, especially in the passing game. And they will potentially not really cause a whole lot of chaos in the backfield if the Oklahoma State game is any indication, which could really spell a lot of trouble for them against JT Daniels.
It could. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Our receivers, there's been some movement. I think Sam James is, wildly inconsistent player. We're not exactly sure why. He caught 69 balls his redshirt freshman year, and has never eclipsed it. He has flashes. It's just an interesting case. He's had some mental health issues. It's documented. So I don't want to touch on that too much, but so we're going to try some other kids at the slot. We've got an interesting story. Preston Fox, he's a walk-on. He was one of those guys where the coach announces you've got your scholarship in front of friends and family, and then we had that moment for him over the summer. It was really awesome. He's got the best hands on the team. If you go back to the spring game and look up some of his highlights, I mean, Sports Center worthy. He's got hands for that. I mean, some of the best hands I've ever seen. But there's a reason he hasn't played, or either Neil Brown has a hard time playing younger players, so it could be that. But I'll be interested to see what he does if he gets a chance. We need I've been saying this has been my mantra this week. In order for this offense to take the next step, we need production from the slot. We've got two wideouts on the edges that are both possession-ish players. Bryce Ford Wheaton can get down the field, but we have no production in the middle of the offense with Michael Laughlin, who has been in and out. He's injured as well right now. We don't know until the end of the week whether he's going to play. So the middle of the field, really didn't get worked a whole lot. Sam James showed up against Virginia Tech for a touchdown down the seam. That's been it the entire year. It's not going to work. And I mean, from what you highlighted earlier, you guys kind of know what I'm talking about because Sims has been out. So we're hoping to get some production out of the slot. If we do, I think we've got a chance to put some points up. It's going to be interesting. I saw the over-under on the game earlier today. It was at 44. So that's pretty low.
That's very low.
So not sure if that line's moved any. I imagine as the money comes in, it may towards Thursday. Personally, as far as the stadium goes, I think that there's always more fans in Morgantown than people would expect. We rarely have less than 50,000 people there. Every now and again, we had a 1-3 start a few years ago. We had 40,000 fans, but it's rare that we don't show up for a game, especially a Thursday night game like this. I think we'll show up, and the atmosphere will be really good. So you said what you said. You've noted all the insecurities that you have about the team. So are you able to give a prediction?
Yeah, I am. I'm just sitting there thinking about that 44 and whether or not I agree with that or not. I'm thinking that the Oklahoma State game, that ended up being like 61. So I could definitely see that more of a style of game like that. But yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I'm picking Baylor to win this game, and I'm doing it because I think I don't know how much better of a team they are, but based on just what I've seen so far, I know that they're and like so is West Virginia. West Virginia is better than 2-3. Baylor's better than 3-2.
Right.
Baylor's
Absolutely.
got some concerns that I do still have and will have until they prove otherwise, but they're not far off from being, a 5-0 team at this point. So I believe
No.
that team that could be 5-0 is still in there. I have to believe that coming off of an open week that they've looked in the mirror and maybe grown up a little bit and found themselves a little bit more. But I know that West Virginia has been doing that as well, and that their record would be different if a couple things went differently. So I think they're
Yeah.
both very similar teams in that regard. I don't think that there's like a noticeable advantage as far as quarterback play goes for either side, really. So I mean, I'm telling you, I think Thursday in Morgantown, and with this team being a little bit potentially, I don't know, immature. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but I guess it comes closest to kind of paraphrasing everything. I'll take Baylor in this game. I think that the fact that they went out and they experienced the BYU game as tough as that was, and were able to go win in Ames, shortly thereafter, that really did them some good to know that they could go out on the road and win a game if they just played well. I'm trying to think like what I think the score will be. But no, I'm going Baylor in this game, and give me like, like a 31-20, like a 34-24. Is that too high scoring? Probably. I don't know. I'm not very good at these types of things. I'm good.
I think that sounds about right.
But yeah, I'm thinking like that type of a game, like a 34-24 Baylor victory, where they probably separate closer to later than earlier, obviously, and yeah, something along those lines is kind of where my head's at right now. But by no means am I thinking that this is going to be, as one of my AirPods falls out, by no means am I thinking this is going to be a cakewalk for Baylor or that a win is guaranteed. I've got respect for West Virginia and the circumstances involved. I definitely think that they've got more than a puncher's chance. But, yeah, give me the Bears like 34-24.
And that's fair. Paul picked them 31-19 earlier, I believe. So you guys are like-minded in that. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And I apologize. I was off on the spread. It was 54. So I don't know if that's either gone up or if it's moved. I'm not sure, but 54.
That makes more sense. Yeah.
Yeah. That was secondhand. I heard from somebody else, so I should have researched it before I just threw it out there. But looking at it, in my opinion, if C.J. Donaldson, he's going to grow into the best back in the conference. At some point, he's going to be the best back in the conference. Unfortunately, he's concussed in a very scary play against Texas. I have a guy coming on my show. I don't know if you watched the Tua video that the concussion doctor did that's got a bunch of views. Anyway, I reached out to him. He agreed to come on, but I talked to him a little bit in between, and he told me the kind of concussion that CJ had. Couple that with sensitivity towards concussions right now after what happened to Tua, and he's going to be out probably 4 to 6 weeks. So I understand that.
I'll tell you, Tay McWilliams, that's what he's been dealing with. Baylor's starting running back. I mean, he got popped against BYU, and we haven't seen him since. I mean, he's been just a no-go. And I didn't ask, but somebody asked Aranda on Saturday because they moved up the media sessions. And we thought, okay, it's been like almost a month now. Like, he's got to be coming back soon, right? And Aranda's like, we're looking at still a couple more weeks. And so he's going to be looking at like 5-6 weeks since he's played. And, that's alarming. But I do think, and I thought this as well, the Tua thing kind of changed the whole world for everybody. And some people were of the belief of like, oh, well, college football is not going to be changed by that. College football will still operate. I'm like, I don't think so. I think that, maybe not as strict as the NFL, but they're going to have to be far more mindful of it. I hate that for C.J. Donaldson because he's a great player, and I definitely would, make me think a little bit longer on this game if he was available for sure.
Right. Yeah. So with that said, I've picked Baylor on all the other shows I've done. I think it's going to be closer. I think Baylor wins by 6. So I'm going to go 37-31 is what I'm going to go with. And I think it's going to be a close game. especially if Baylor's able to score in the 30s, and I think they're going to be able to this week. I think that's going to be a little bit too much for West Virginia in that defense. So that the Fields, especially the guy in the middle, let me tell you, dude, if you're a fan of this kid and you just want to go watch a press conference to get hyped up about him, go watch what Neil Brown said about him today. He said double teams don't work on this guy, and he pushes these guys into the backfield. Double teams don't work. And against us last year, he actually had a pass rush. I think he had 1.5 sacks against us last year. So he said he played really well. But as we know, Zach Frazier is one of the best centers in the conference. And so he's motivated. He added 50 pounds to his bench press, over almost another 75 to his squat in the offseason. Like we were talking about that mantra. And so we'll see where it goes. I still don't think there's any one man in the country that can handle that guy. But Zach Frazier has man-blocked a ton of people this year. Outside the nose.
Yeah.
Who do you think's better between the nose and Texas and your guys' nose? They're both really good players.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might almost be splitting hairs. I'd have to watch more of the UT tape to probably break it down better, more specifically. But, yeah, I'll put Apu up with pretty much any nose in the country. I mean, when he's at his best, and he's played well this year, I think there are some areas that have slipped a little. I don't think that's necessarily him. And I'm thinking that he might be like just the guy, whether he intends to be or not, that could be kind of the leader that emerges for them over this stretch run. I mean, because they need it. They need somebody. And I think he's been that somewhat. But I do think that if you're pointing at Baylor and like where could they get a spark that sort of drives them home the rest of the way, I think Blake Shapen obviously can do that for you, but I also think Apuik is like that guy on the defense. So, yeah, if he has a big game, then that's obviously going to probably bode really well for Baylor. It'll be tough for West Virginia to run the ball. If it's not, that'll be a huge story, and that's probably terrible news for Baylor because if they've done anything consistently, it's been stopping the run, and he's a big part of that. So I definitely, anywhere from like a single-score game to a 10-point game, I could see. Anything more than that would be a little bit surprising.
Right.
Especially, no offense, if West Virginia were to beat them by like a couple of scores, I think that would be, all due respect to the Mountaineers, but just given what Baylor had coming back this year, that would be awfully disappointing. Yeah. So I have to believe they're going to go on the road and have a good showing. And if not, man, then a lot of those little red flags I was preaching about earlier, well, here in Waco, we'll be talking a lot more about those if that's Absolutely. The case on Thursday night. Yeah.
If West Virginia doesn't lose the players they had to the transfer portal, it'd be interesting to see where this team would be because we would have a defense to match up with the offense more consistently. Yeah. Unfortunately, as you know, we fielded probably one of the 3 best defenses in the conference the last 3 years. And, it just, for some reason, we can't match up an offense with the defense. It just hasn't happened in a while. So it's unfortunate.
It's hard to do.
It is hard to do. I appreciate you coming on, Craig. Can you want to plug your stuff, man? This is a segment I call Plug Your Stuff.
Yeah, I guess you can check me out on Twitter at Craig Smoak. That's Smoak. Just my regular name out there on Twitter. I don't really tweet a whole lot except for like when Baylor's playing, but I'm trying to probably start tweeting a bit more about the Big 12 as we get into the stretch run. I just need to make myself do it more, but I'm always kind of lurking or whatever. But yeah, at Craig Smoak on Twitter. And then outside of that, man, just catch me on 365 Sports on YouTube. We finally hit, I think, 25K.
You did. I checked earlier.
Yeah, so that was a big deal, and it's onward and upward to the next goal. But that was just a big milestone to hit, and
absolutely,
we got a bunch of content. Not just the regular daily show, but there's all sorts of other stuff that's all linked up to it as well, and other like side shows and whatnot that others are taking part in, including a Big 12 focused show with the big one too. So yeah, just check me out 365 Sports on YouTube, Sicem365.com if you're a Baylor fan, which. If you are, then you probably already knew that. But at Craig Smoak on Twitter, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm not really all over the various platforms. I kind of just have a couple of spots, so that's where you can find me.
Well, I don't want to call it fame, but you guys have absolutely saw an explosion in popularity over the last 2 years. And pre-COVID, what were you even doing? I don't even know. You know what I mean? I don't think anybody knew. It's like nationally. So it's interesting to see the blow up you guys have had on YouTube here the last couple of years. Man, that show has just skyrocketed, and it's only growing. And the guests you guys get, oh my God, you got a Rolodex. Oh my goodness, a guy like me who goes through a lot of different channels to get guests. I have to sometimes do some weird stuff. It's like, man, So I really
that's just building up contacts over the years. Like all three of us were in radio before COVID, and then COVID hit, and then people lost jobs, including us.
Yeah.
And I was already doing some stuff for Sicem 365 back then, and they saw an opportunity when the whole world was falling apart. They go like, well, shoot, all you guys are available, and like I reached out to me about like the possibilities of like, does everybody still want to do this type of like, I mean, it's like I got fired the day after my birthday, and I had just come back from the Big 12 tournament that got canceled on day one because of COVID in Kansas City. Yeah. I was in Kansas City for less than 24 hours. I went up there, never saw a single game. The night I got up there was when Rudy Gobert tested positive, and then the whole world changed that very night, right?
Yeah, it did.
And so we did a show in the morning and never even watched a game, went straight to the airport and didn't know what the airport was going to be like or anything. Came back, lost my job 2 days later. And then the other guys did as well. And it's just kind of like everybody went into lockdown, basically. It was definitely a blessing because, I mean, I was kind of ready to move on to something new regardless. And that just timing-wise happened to be perfect for me. And then to unpredictably have those guys also available and to be able to like be a part of what this has now turned into, and for the guys at Sicem to see the opportunity of like, wow, like we got to invest in this in a big major way, a studio and a host and things, but like we've got a golden opportunity that's very unique, and they went all in, and that's why we got the setup that we've got and why we've had that, and then realignment hits. That was like the perfect timing as well, because everybody wanted to talk about realignment. And so it's just been very like timing is everything, and timing has been everything with this, and I definitely appreciate you and everybody else out there who's checked us out from just being a lot of Baylor, and still, we'll still focus on Baylor obviously, but we've tried to expand it as much as we can without.
You guys do a wonderful job, man.
Yeah, thank you. Without trying to be something that we're not. So there's a lot of options out there, and for those who choose us as one of their options, we definitely appreciate you, and we thank you so much.
Yeah, and I don't see you guys stopping. I think you guys are on a Josh Pate kind of rise, and he's blown up. So it's really interesting. I really just so happy for you guys, especially hearing that backstory. Man, that makes me sad. I'm one of those people, though, that I really root for people, and you guys have been so nice to me, so you'll forever have a supporter out of me. So that's just who I am. I'm a loyal person. That's just what I am. It can't be what I'm not.
Yeah, loyalty is very important, and that's why we've all stuck together, and that's why the stuff with Sicem has manifested the way that it has, and why we're all very loyal to each other. And I'll tell you what, we're loyal to. We may not talk West Virginia as much as everybody would always like, but they're always going to get brought up at some point or another because. Yeah. A lot of our loyal listeners are West Virginia fans, and that was evident pretty early on as, like you guys were just as much as a Baylor fan or a TCU fan, like, where are we playing football soon? And like, who's leaving and where are we going? And, all that stuff. I definitely remember West Virginia fans being amongst those early supporters. So definitely got a soft spot in my heart for WVU. And, then add in,
appreciate that.
I want Graham Harrell to do well. I like Neil Brown and JT Daniels has been great, and on and on and on. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of the Mountaineers, and I definitely appreciate you and appreciate everybody else's support as well.
So if you guys go check out those guys on 365. They do a wonderful job of, even if you can't catch the show live, whoever it is that chops the thing up and plays it out in segments, excellent job, great marketing strategy, do a wonderful job with it. They have people like Tim Brando. They've got the former Bob Thompson. They get everybody that you could think of that knows anything. Anybody you could want. Even Tony Caridi and Jed Drenning come on the show. I mean, people I can't get. So, I mean, it's awesome. So I don't beat the heck out of your drum, but so. Craig, you've
No,
been on here
we
with
don't
me
have.
for an hour.
No, I was gonna say with Tony and Jed, and yeah, I do need to run, but I appreciate you. But those guys are great, and we appreciate them every time they join us. Those are semi-regulars. You know, we don't have a set date they come on, but they join us like every probably couple months or so. And you know, we already talked to Tony this week, and we don't have like a big machine behind us, believe it or not. We've got great supportive people, but it's very like it's not 247's like big machine behind somebody pushing them and promoting them. I mean, it's very much
Right.
like grassroots in so many ways, and that
You got
makes
to
it
do the
even,
work.
yeah, a bit more special. So thank you for noticing. Thank you for supporting Paul and everybody else out there. It means a great deal. I just can't say it enough, man. And I really appreciate you having. Whoop, there goes the AirPod again. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to seeing what unfolds on Thursday night.
All right. I need about 30 seconds after the show to talk with you, and then we're good to go. Mountaineer fans, The game is Thursday. It's Baylor. It's West Virginia. Baylor's never won there. They're going to try to change that narrative this coming Thursday. We'll see what happens. You guys have a great evening. We'll see you Thursday.